And what I thought I'd do is break the presentation down into 3 areas. So first of all, what I'm going to do is give you a really quick crash course on the stock photography industry. It's a massive marketplace, and I'll just give you some a framework in terms of some of the numbers and metrics around that. The reason why we believe it's broken, and why a lot of the participants and the stakeholders in the industry believe it's broken. And then I'm going to tell you how it's fixable, and our slant and our take on how we're out to fix that and create a more equitable environment for the participants. So, big marketplace. So there's about 350,000 semi-pro or pro photographers in the world. If you do a search on LinkedIn, for example, in the search box under people, and if you type in the word photographer under there, the last check that I did, there was over 500,000 people with the word photographer in their profile. Everyone's a photographer now. We've all got amazing camera phones in our pockets. The way we define semi-pro or pro photographer is a semi-pro photographer earns about 50% or more of their income from photography, and a pro photographer we classify generally as somebody that earns about 90% or more from their photography. Every year there's about 380 billion images taken, so every week, every day there's tens of millions of images uploaded to Facebook. And the digitization of stock photography happened around 2004, when most of the photographers started to move from analog to digital photography. So you can imagine all of this content out there that's sitting around on hard drives. And this is the real key. Only about 200 million of those images are actually indexed or available online. So if you look at the major players, companies like Getty Images, Corbis Images, Shutterstock, Flickr, iStock, they contain the domain of most of those images. But actually a very small percentage of all the images that are taken are actually indexed and available online. So there's about 500,000 buyers in the world. And when we talk about buyers, we're talking about professional buyers. So these are advertising agencies, publishing companies, book publishers, editorial publishing, magazines, advertorial. There's a lot of buyers out there. My transition from Keynote to PowerPoint hasn't worked very well, so that note is supposed to be up there. So there's about 5 billion that's spent every year on pre-shot stock photography. So about 5 billion on pre-stock, pre-shot, and then about another 3 billion that's commissioned. So this is where you might go out and commission an actual a photographer. And interestingly, there's actually another 3 billion on top of that, which is wedding photography. It's a big industry. So the bit that we're focused on is that 5 billion. So why is it broken? It all sounds great, right? Well, first of all, there's a duopoly. And the duopoly, in particular, one of the major players, Getty Images, have been around for about 20 years, 25 years, have acquired about 130 companies just in the last 10 to 15 years. And they've bought all this content, and so they've basically aggregated and consolidated all of this imagery. But what it means for the supplier, for the creative, is that they have very limited output in terms of the channels that they can actually sell their material. And over time what's happened is, classic duopoly or monopoly situations, the terms lean very much towards the intermediary. And a lot of photographers are leaving the major stock photography companies in droves simply because the terms are onerous and it's very hard to get their imagery found in that massive imagery. There's a quote here by a lady called Betsy Reed, who's the founding member of the Stock Artist Alliance, that talked about the issue from the buyer's perspective. So really what Betsy's talking about is, how do you navigate, as you get more and more and more content, how do you navigate through that? If you're looking for an image and you want to be descriptive about the type of photography that you're looking for, how do you translate that when you're looking through keyworded images? And so the more images that they become online that are indexed, the harder they can become to navigate. And just from personal experience, nothing to do with photography, I was in the supermarket the other day and I was looking for Weet-Bix for my daughter. And as I was walking down the aisle, there must have been 3,000 different types of breakfast cereal to choose from. And it made me realise, like 10 to 15 years ago, there would have been like 5 or 6 brands, and now there's just thousands of them. It's that classic thing is, as you get more and more choices, navigation becomes harder, especially on a hangover, because it was my 40th birthday the day before. I don't know why I was out choosing breakfast cereal. So how long does it take for a buyer to navigate through? Typically, when we interviewed our buyers, these are, again, advertising agencies, publishing companies, in-house marketing departments. On average, it can take about 3 hours for these buyers to actually find the right shot. And so you've got art buyers, photo editors, creative directors looking through all of these keyworded images. This is the really interesting one that we found. We ran a stock library for 7 years. That's how we know most of this data. About 90% of a professional photographer's work is not indexed or online. So if you imagine as a pro photographer, and I've met photographers that have millions of images sitting around on hard drives now, I think a very small percentage of that content is online. And that just lit a light bulb for us. That got us thinking, wow, 90% of the world's content is not available online. How do we make that accessible? And how do we make that available for buyers that are looking for the content? The commission's in decline for photographers, as I mentioned before. So the average commission's now for a photographer somewhere between 20 and 30%. And we think that that's wrong. So we went out to fix it. We started the project about 3 years ago. We went full-time on the business in January last year. We started in Sydney, and we called it ImageBrief. And the principles behind ImageBrief are very simple. What we've done, in essence, is use crowdsourcing to do almost the complete reversal of things that are available today in the marketplace. So we've got a status quo with the current duopoly. We wanted to disintermediate that. And what we wanted to do is basically create a connection between the buyer and the photographer direct and create a platform to enable us to do that. Instead of navigating using keywords, and so each image on a stock library typically would have somewhere between about 50 and 80 words attached to that single image to describe it. We wanted our buyers to be able to use natural language, and so produce a natural language request, and they could be as descriptive as they wanted to and explain exactly what they were looking for. And rather than having a 3-hour search period, we wanted to turn that into a 2-minute process. So 99% improvement on the speed of that. The other thing is, and this is real key, and this is where I get quite passionate about crowdsourcing, is we want to help people monetize idle assets. And the idle asset, in our case, for photography, is actually an image that's sitting around on a hard drive, and in some cases, it's the photographer's time. How many of you guys are familiar with Airbnb? Let's see a show of hands. How many are familiar with Uber, the car service app? Great. So Airbnb, in essence, helps folks at home, monetize their idle asset. And in their case, it's a bed. Uber, which is a car service app, which is big in New York, helps drivers monetize their idle asset, which is a car. And we're doing exactly the same for photography. And this is why I get passionate about crowdsourcing, because I think what it does is it helps people monetize idle assets. And whether that's a piece of content that's sitting around already, or it might be their time, it's very powerful. And the other thing that we wanted to do with ImageBrief was to turn the commission upside down, so to give the photographer 70%. So let me just give you some examples of how it works, and I'll talk to you about some of the challenges that we've had in here as well, and some of the things that we're working on optimizing. I just saw somebody up there on an iPad looking at our site a minute ago. I apologize, it's a pretty naff experience on an iPad. We're just about to launch the mobile version. Sorry, who was it? Who was you there? So, really simple premise. Buyers can come in, post a brief, they get complete control. So the buyer can say, this is what I want, this is how much money I've got, here's some reference images. So if you're a brand, you can upload brand guidelines. If you're an art director, you can upload reference images that you might have drawn or sketched. I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. But now where we've got to now, we've got about 800 advertising agencies and brands that are posting briefs on our platform. And there's about 6,500 photographers around the world in over 115 different countries that respond to those briefs. It's a curated platform, so we actually curate and moderate and check the photographers before they come in, and that helps us maintain a level of quality. We'll talk about quality today and how to manage that. And there's a number of algorithms that we use as well in terms of measuring the photographer's accuracy and then presenting those up to the buyer in the most appropriate format. So this is an example of a brief, and what I've done is I've taken one of the images from the brief that was sent back in response to that. So you can see this actually was a pharmaceutical company, and this was what they were describing. We're looking for a young Caucasian, brunette or blonde, early 20s, dressed casually, dark mood, candid shot that doesn't look staged, looking away from the camera, and room for our hay fever product and copy. So you can imagine trying to translate this into a keyword indexed. You'd just never be able to do it. You get gobbledygook. Here what we get is accurate responses. The briefing form, very simple. They can describe, as I said, what they're looking for, set the creative direction. The format is at landscape. Now, the interesting thing is, because this is being interpreted by a brain, they can say whatever they want. They can be as descriptive as they want. So let me show you a couple of examples. This is how descriptive some of the briefs get. So this one is for Expedia in Australia. Now, for the purpose of the brief, our clients can choose to be visible, so they could say this is Saatchi & Saatchi, or we're DDB agency in New York, or they can be anonymous. So we give them that opportunity. We say to the clients, if you can say who you are, then what that means is when the photographer receives the brief, they can say, oh, this is for Prada, or this is for so-and-so brand, and they're more likely to respond and give better entries back because they want the glory of having their images in those campaigns. So Expedia, what they did is they put out a bunch of briefs. You can see this one showcasing the best of European coastlines. They need to inspire people, capture their imaginations, and motivate them to book their hotel in Europe with our travel company. So again, you're just never going to be able to put that into a keyword engine. I won't bore you with that, but I'll just show you. PowerPoint or Keynote doesn't work very well in terms of being able to scroll through these images, but there was actually about 550 images that were submitted back. And you can see the photographers are actually able to caption these so that the buyer can see which location. So for Expedia, for example, what they've done is they've put about 60 briefs out, all for different locations around the world. And because we've got photographers all over the world, we can geolocate those notifications to those photographers based on geography and based on their genre of photography. So if you're a landscape photographer and you only want to receive briefs that are over $1,000, then you can only receive those ones. If you only want to receive briefs that are about New York and food, you can do that as well. This was the winning shot that actually came in from a chap called Ben Good, who is quite good. There's the final artwork of that. So the great thing for Ben is that he's actually had an opportunity there to sell to a client. This is a shot that he took while he was on holiday. He actually took a picture of himself with this image going past on a bus down through Sydney like that and sent it in to us, which was quite fun. So Ben actually gets a profile on here now, and what the customer can do is then they can go follow Ben, and we've got what's called a discovery feed. And what that means is that if you're Expedia and you like Ben's work, you can follow Ben. So we've got the asynchronous follow model, a little bit like Twitter. And whenever Ben uploads new images to briefs, they appear in the discovery feed. And so over time what happens is the buyers can come in, they can uncover and locate and discover new photographers' work that they didn't know existed. So here's a couple of other examples. The interesting thing is the photography side is that 9 out of 10 of the briefs that are fulfilled are actually through images that are already sitting on hard drives. And so this one, you can't read this very well, but this was for a Scandinavian branding company, obviously Volvo. And the brief here was that they were looking for a shot of a Scandinavian landscape. They were very specific about this. Now the choice for the buyer here was if they were going to go and shoot this, it was going to cost them about $15,000 to set up a shoot, get a camera crew together. They just didn't have that budget. We've got a photographer here that had it in his back catalogue, and you can see the artwork on the bottom right there where they've dropped the 3 cars in. This one was for an in-house marketing department. So for those of you who've got swimming pools that are controlled by your iPhone, you're cooler than me. I wish I did. But what they wanted was a shot of a pool at night, and they were going to drop this app in there. And again, that's actually the photographer's his back room. This is for a CD company looking for a shot of and I'll read it to you because it's kind of interesting. We're looking for a close-up face of an ape or a chimpanzee. It should be portrait style and as if the animal's in thought with no bars obscuring the face. So again, you just never been able to describe that. So we're creating the access and descriptive nature and allowing the photographers to then interpret that. And so we've had tons of successful briefs go through, generated hundreds of thousands of dollars for our photographers in the last year since we went live in January.
Hi, I'm Jeff Birding. I live in Manhattan Beach, California, and I am an active lifestyle photographer. I recently sold an image through ImageBrief. I think the initial sale was $7,500, and then they recently contacted us to extend it another 2 years, so $20,000 total. ImageBrief handled all the negotiations with the client and all the details of the contract. It's a very simple process to upload the photos. You can upload 1 or 20, and there's no upfront fees or anything like that that would deter you from, committing to it. So it's absolutely worth it to be submitting those images to ImageBrief when it's the right match. I think as a professional photographer, you have to have lots of irons and lots of different fires, and so having that other resource of ImageBrief and having all the contacts around the world, which I wouldn't normally have access to, is a great way to open up more opportunities for our images to sell. There
you go. So that's Jeff Birding. So he's ended about 6 briefs, won 4, has made about $50,000 off imagery that's sitting in his back catalogue. Thanks, Epi. So just in terms of kind of summarising where we're at, and I'd love to take questions and find out what you guys are thinking if there's entrepreneurs here that are looking at setting up businesses based on crowdsourcing, particularly marketplaces or two-sided platforms. There's a bunch of challenges that you have around that, so we're keen to chat to you about that and our experience. So we talked about the monetization of idle assets. I think this is absolutely key to crowdsourcing. It's one of the things that we're really proud of, that we help creators do every day. The global transactions that were previously unavailable, so we're connecting photographers in all different areas of the world with buyers in all different areas of the world. And they're actually getting visibility for the first time of what buyers want. Because previously with stock photography and stock libraries, the buyers would go in and search on a keyword index library, but that would never translate through to the actual creator. And the visibility of demand, pricing and usage. So one of the things that's important in these type of marketplaces is that you give both sets of users complete control. So from the buy side, they have control over budget, they have control over usage, time frame, creative expression, and the actual photographers get to vote with their images. And so they can submit images as long as they're happy with the budgetary terms and the usages that have been set by the buyer. So that visibility really helps.
I just wanted to ask you, marketplace ideas as a startup is one of the hardest ideas to execute. So how do you get agencies to trust you at the start when you don't have anything at all? And that how do you get photographers to even come on the platform? You said it was like 3 years spent in the making. So what were the challenges you faced on the way?
Yeah, no, great question. So first of all, regarding trust, that's a really important one, particularly when you're dealing with the licensing of intellectual property. So interestingly, what we found is we prototyped, well, I've got an English accent, I lived in Australia for 16 years and I've just moved to New York. We actually set the business up in Sydney. And one of the first things we did is we did what's called an MVP, our minimum viable product, which was a really ugly, horrible version of the site with only a few photographers. And we knocked on a bunch of doors and we went around the agencies and we talked about what we're trying to do. The very first day the platform went live, we had a brief from Saatchi & Saatchi for an aerial shot of Dubai. It was for an app for Emirates. And we realised straight away there was definitely a need there on the buy side. Funnily enough, we didn't have any aerial photographers from Dubai, and so we had to go and find those and hustle them and bring them onto the platform. The good thing is there's no friction on either side, so it's free for our buyers to post a brief and submit that. There's no obligation to buy. And then on the photographer side, there's no fee to participate. And so reducing that friction was one of the real important things. We found with the smaller agencies or subsidiary of agencies in Sydney, for example, they were happy to transact without any problems. When we moved to New York, one of the things that we found was we suddenly appeared on the legal radar of big companies. And so what we've been doing for the last few months is setting up legal agreements and going through insurance checks and stuff with those big agencies like Omnicom and WPP. So those type of big brands and advertising agencies are very hot on that, particularly in the US. And so we've done that and been through that process. And so it's like anything, it's about relationships, it's about letting them know the ethics of the platform, the philosophy behind what we're doing, and just getting in there and meeting people and talking to them about it. How do we see it growing? Well, look, there's tons of runway for us. I mean, we've only got 700 or 800 agencies or buyers out of 500,000. So there's a lot of way to go. There's a few things that we're working on at the moment, particularly around mobile. So we're just about to submit our mobile app into the store. And the mobile app basically is quite exciting because what it allows us to do is, as a photographer, you'll be able to read briefs on the fly. So if you look at the time period that it takes a buyer to search right now, which is 3 hours, so that means our result to deliver a compelling user experience really has to get images back within the first 3 hours. And mobile notifications and submission from the cloud are part of that. And then what we'll do is move on to location-based commissioning. But yeah, speed is one of the key things, and I think it came up in discussion earlier about, if you've got a distributed crowd around the world, and ours are in 115 different countries, at any one time, only a third of those at best are going to be awake. And then what you have to do is then break that down by genre, and you say, okay, well, you've got landscape, food, portrait, lifestyle, and so all of a sudden your available crowd shrinks the further down you go, and so there's a critical mass needed on the supply side. And we feel like we're just hitting that now.
How do you guarantee the IP?
Yeah.
So for the buyer, when they are sourcing an imagery, they brief.
Yeah.
That the photographers do as
Owns the copyright. So there's a couple of ways we do that. Well, first of all, the checks as the photographers come onto the platform, we vet them to make sure they're a pro photographer or a good photographer. And so we reduce a lot of noise, that kind of signal to noise, which is what you're ultimately trying to optimize. When the images come in, we actually have a fingerprinting technology that scans the web for the image automatically as it's submitted, and so we can pick up if it's been used elsewhere. At the point of transaction, the license agreement is generated through the platform. We collect model releases if that's applicable. So for example, if it's for advertising and there's a recognizable face, you need a model release. So we collect the model release. We've got insurances to protect us around that. The key thing though is that, and here's the crux, is that ultimately if you're licensing an image to a buyer and it needs to be a certain resolution, normally only the original photographer has that high-res file. Because you can't just scrape a low-res file and then sell that, because the buyer wouldn't be able to use it because the resolution would be too low, unless it was only for digital purposes. But most of the transactions that we have are for things like billboards, product packaging, advertising, and yeah. So that's how we manage it, but it's a key part.
Has that made any difference? Are there anyone using smartphones and loading up images?
It's a great idea.
Because
So
I've taken some the image quality that I am able to capture with 8 megapixel smartphone was so much better than the early generation of digital cameras that I'm taking.
yeah. So the question is, how soon are smartphones going to impact SLRs and basically professional imagery? I think very soon. I mean, if you look at the Moore's law, 8 megapixels, the next one will be 16, the next generation after that. I mean, you can buy apps now that actually enhance the resolution of a file, so you can get big printouts. So we've had one transaction go through from a guy that had taken a picture on a smartphone on honeymoon of a beach. It was only used for print, but it was a beautiful quality. I think very soon they'll start to impact more and more. We're talking to a brewery, a large brewery company in China actually, and what they want to do is create a campaign around people, Chinese people around the world enjoying their lager in different Chinatowns around the world. And so that's how they want to build their brand experience. And because we can trigger, most big cities have got Chinatowns, and we can trigger notifications to photographers in those areas and get them to have a beer on Chinese New Year's Eve and submit those into the application. And so that's one example. I mean, that was literally a conversation last week we had with them, and they'd be happy for that particular campaign for those images to be shot on smartphones. It takes it. I mean, at the moment what we're doing is focus on kind of advertising, publishing, and in-house marketing departments. But where it does take it is into things like news reporting, celebrity reporting. There's a major event happening. Like the Boston bombing. All of a sudden, bang! People want imagery. And been able to crowdsource and collate those into a central place, and we have the technology that could do that. We're not there yet in terms of kind of marketing that as a product, but I think within the next 2 or 3 years, I think smartphones will come very close to competing with SLRs, and all of a sudden, as we saw on the image of the Pope ceremony there, everyone is a photographer and has a high quality camera in their pocket.
So you mentioned that they're going Is pricing flexible?
The buyer sets the budget up front. So the buyer says, I've got $500 or $1,000 or $2,000 or $15,000. So the lowest price brief that we have on the platform is $200. The most that we've sold is a $20,000 image, which was to Timotei. It was a hair product. But what they've done is they purchased it for $7,500, then came back and said, we want to use it around the world. For point of sale, and it was still about $30,000 or $40,000 cheaper for them than actually creating the shoot, because if you create the shoot and you get the stylist and the photographer and everyone involved, you still don't know what you're going to end up with until the actual shoot's taken place. Whereas here you get a suite of responses back to choose from.
ImageBrief have other business models in the business other than the exchange?
No.
If you're getting 6,000 advertisers, must be anxious to reach that people.
Yeah, possibly. I mean, we've spoken to some media companies and stuff that are quite keen to reach that crowd, and it's a bit like the early days of Facebook when they were looking at advertising and how you integrate that into the model. We may in the future move to a freemium premium model where we give some extra benefits to photographers and have a nice clean one, but I think we want to try and keep away from having it like over polluted. But there's a valuable community there that's building and growing very quickly. And because the terms are so for the photographer and the visibility, most of the growth on the photographer side has actually been through kind of that dark social, the stuff that you can't measure, which happens offline, which is word of mouth and social referrals and stuff, where a photographer will recommend and bring in a number of his colleagues and friends.